202-4YOU or BaptistJacks.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning and welcome to the Friday edition of First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler, and our expert media panel is here to discuss the week's top headlines. Among them, Florida's redistricting map and a U.S. Supreme Court decision promise to reshape Congress and minority political representation for years to come. We'll also be discussing why Florida's Attorney General initiates yet another Jacksonville investigation, this time into JEA. Finally, a memorial to the victims of the Dollar General mass shooting is destroyed by vandals, and a local woman plans to file suit over her court-ordered C-section. Later in the program, History You Can Feel. We sit down with our own David Luckin to talk about his newest sonic creation, This Week in Music History. Join the conversation. Give us a call on air at 904-549-2937 or go to firstcoastconnect.org to find all the ways to connect with us. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. President Trump is floating potential changes to the U.S. military posture in Europe. Answering a question yesterday, Trump said he could probably consider pulling U.S. troops out of Italy and Spain. He is vexed that European nations have refused to send their forces to the Strait of Hormuz with the U.S. in the war against Iran. Trump's comments on Italy and Spain came after he said he was considering pulling troops out of Germany, too. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is stressing the importance of the transatlantic partnership. Esme Nicholson reports.
Speaking to reporters at a German military base, Merz affirmed a strong NATO remains top priority. Referring to Germany's relationship with the United States, he said it is particularly close to our hearts and to him personally. Trump said Merz should focus on trying to end Russia's war in Ukraine instead of, quote, interfering with the issue of Iran. Earlier this week, Merz remarked the Iranian regime has, quote, humiliated the United States and added the US appears to have no exit strategy from what he called an ill-conceived war. For NPR News, I'm Esme Nicholson in Berlin.
It has been at least 60 days since President Trump and Israel began attacking Iran. That's a deadline specified by the War Powers Resolution Act of 1973 that says after 60 days, a president must seek congressional authorization to continue hostilities. In Senate testimony yesterday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth seemed to wave that off. He said the timeline does not apply because of the current ceasefire with Iran. Democrats oppose this, while some Republican senators have indicated they are ready to back the president on this view. The House has passed the Mammoth Farm Bill. This sets out spending for major food and agriculture programs for 5 years at a time. These range from food benefits to support for farmers. Some Democrats say farmers need more support. Anti-hunger groups say the House Farm Bill did not restore significant cuts to food support needed by children. President Trump has approved a cross-border permit for the Bridger Pipeline Expansion Project. From Montana Public Radio, Ellis Julin reports this would cross part of Montana and Wyoming.
The pipeline would move 500,000 gallons of crude tar sands oil from Canada into the U.S. daily. It's in a similar area to the Keystone XL pipeline, which was terminated under President Biden. The Bridger pipeline would cross major rivers, including the Missouri and the Yellowstone, prompting fears about the potential for contamination of water sources. It could also run through the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, home to the Assiniboine and Sioux tribes. Tribal nations were not consulted as part of Trump's permitting decision. The proposal must still go through several permitting processes at the state and federal levels before construction could begin as early as next summer. For NPR News, I'm Ellis Julin in Missoula, Montana.
This is NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. Public access of specific bills on Jacksonville City Council agendas will be limited through early June as the city brings the City Council website into compliance with federal Americans with Disabilities regulations. Agendas for past and scheduled City Council meetings can still be accessed in the legislative gateway, but attempts to get individual bills won't work. Currently, you'll be asked to give a username and password. A City Council spokesperson says the city is making all documents available via a public records request while the site is updated. Florida's toxic algae bloom season starts in June, but the state has already issued multiple health alerts this year. As Jessica Mazzaros reports in Lakeland, researchers are testing a mechanism they hope will filter out the nutrients that feed the blooms.
Floridians have to endure toxic red tide blooms at their beaches and harmful blue-green algae in their freshwater canals, rivers, and lakes. It's been getting worse over the years, partially due to stormwater pushing nutrient-rich fertilizer into water bodies.
Florida is a big state of using fertilizer.
Florida Polytechnic University researcher Yudi Wu has a solution for that. 5-foot floating columns, which can absorb the phosphorus and nitrogen found in fertilizer.
It can help to remove as much nutrients as possible that we are interested in.
The 2-year study is in collaboration with FAMU and funded by a $300,000 state grant. I'm Jessica Mazzaros in Tampa.
Temperatures are now in the lower 70s in Jacksonville.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Joyce Foundation, committed to advancing racial equity and economic mobility for the next generation in the Great Lakes region. Learn more at joycefdn.org. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler, joining you from the tail end of a very busy news week. Our media panel is here to help us break it down on the Friday Week in Review. Among our topics, Florida sees red with a new congressional map that all but eliminates Democrats, and that move followed a Supreme Court decision that could all but eliminate minority access districts. Also this week, the state attorney general says he too plans to investigate JEA. A memorial to victims of a racist mass shooting is destroyed by vandals. And a local woman says she plans to sue after a court ordered her to undergo a C-section she did not want. To talk about all that and more, I am joined by Sylvia Perry, editor of the Jacksonville Free Press.
Good
Sylvia,
morning.
Good morning. We're also joined by Brenda Priestly Jackson, former Jacksonville City Council member, former Duval County School Board member. Brenda Priestly Jackson, thanks for being here.
Good morning.
John Daigle, political consultant and former City Hall reporter here in Jacksonville. John, good morning.
Good morning, Ann. Nice to be back again.
Nice to have you. We're also joined by A.G. Gankarski, reporter at Florida Politics and columnist for Jacksonville Today. Hey, A.G.
Hey, good morning.
So, two major decisions this week could change election results for years to come. A SCOTUS decision, redistricting in Florida. John, where should we begin with this? Because both the redistricting and the Supreme Court decision are expected to really reshape elections as we know them.
Yeah, and of course, we're all still waiting to see what's going to happen ultimately in Virginia with those 4 votes, and as well as probably the likely legal challenge to what happened in Florida this week. So those two are going to be interesting to watch how they conclude. But at the end of the day, this is for a lot of independent voters like me, it's just really painful to watch. I mean, it just is, because you can do it doesn't mean you should. I mean, we're in a state with 3.5 million voters. About 40% of those are Republican, and now we have a map that is where 86% of our elected, federal officials are going to be, almost certain to be Republican. It just really hurts when we continue to see politics played like a football game where it's about who wins and loses and less about representing the voters. And anybody who looks at that map and again, especially the colored map that DeSantis delivered to Fox News, and looks at how that's supposed to represent a state where Republicans only represent about 42% of voters, it just boggles the mind.
There are people you'll see on social media, you'll see reported in some outlets, Brenda Priestly Jackson, who say, well, yeah, Florida looks like that, but look at Massachusetts. Look at these other states that have, 40+% Republicans and have equally little representation on the congressional map.
Yeah, I think the real issue that we're dealing with now is that we have taken an ahistorical perspective of why we had the Voting Rights Act. We've taken a ahistorical perspective of what's happened historically in the South, why it came to be, and we now have replaced what would have been racial considerations with partisanship, and that is not permissible. And so some may argue that partisanship is often a proxy for race in some arenas. And so I think the Supreme Court has clearly said it is permissible for you to consider incumbency, and it is permissible for you to consider partisanship. And you really can't separate the two of those, because an incumbent is a member of a political party more often than not. I think what struck me the most was that I believe the first volley of this happened locally in our redistricting case. So the redistricting that was brought here in Jacksonville, Duval County, that stripped incumbency. That was the plaintiff's maps that now we currently operate on the city council, right? It stripped incumbency. It said that they were advancing more Democratic districts. So if you take an ahistorical perspective, which I believe that ruling did, because it never went into the underlying factors of how 7, 8, 9, and 10 were originally created with the demographics that it had in the early 90s. And you then sit back and say, in this time, we want voters to pick their elect, we want voters to be able to pick who's in office, not those in office pick the voters, which was a ding at incumbency. The Supreme Court has said, no, that is very permissible. The incumbents, you can protect incumbency, and you then also now have a partisan basis of doing that. They're the same thing, right? And so what you're going to hear in the South, many say is, well, this partisanship push is really a proxy for race, but it's not according to the Supreme Court anymore. Right? It's not.
I mean, according to our own laws in Florida, Sylvia, we are not allowed to, traditionally, this amendment that voters approved, we're not allowed to consider party. We're not supposed to consider partisanship when doing these redistricting. Now the Supreme Court says that is acceptable. It seems like it would just make people more cynical about the whole process by saying that a purely partisan goal is okay, that it's okay to say that we want this party to win, therefore we're going to create these districts.
I'm in agreement totally. It does send a negative message. But I think that as far as voters and even our judicial system is concerned, you need to consider why these districts were even created in the first place, to correct generations of disenfranchisement. And the gerrymandered, quote unquote, districts only affect 70 out of 435 districts, 70. And yet that representation is not even allowed here. So it's got legal ramifications. We want to talk about the Constitution that was created where African Americans were considered 3/5 human. And yet we want to take that back to the Constitution too. So if we're going to correct it all, we need to correct the entire thing.
AG, when it comes to designing maps in Florida, specifically the Florida redistricting map, initially there was a lot of effort by lawmakers to contort themselves and say, well, this isn't partisan. This is going to be driven by the Supreme Court decision, out of Louisiana, based in the Louisiana case. And so this isn't partisan. And yet ultimately the governor released a map that was red and blue, not a color. Usually there's sort of these multicolored maps to delineate districts that are, and they're by district. They're not by party, and they don't pull out, say, this is a Democratic area versus a red Republican area. And they admitted using partisan data to draw these districts. So all of a sudden, the Fair Districts Amendment seems out of the window.
Well, lawmakers were very careful not to talk about it at all. The Republicans did not advocate for it before voting for it really in the House or the Senate, except for the bill sponsors. The governor, he has said that the Fair Districts Amendment was null and void and superseded by the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. And that's really what's in play here. I mean, they did what the governor wanted, and they did it in such a way that they have nothing on record talking about it. They wanted to avoid
publicly.
Yeah, they wanted to avoid discovery. They wanted to avoid being called into trials. They want their summers off. So even the House, which has pushed back against DeSantis in many ways throughout the session, including rejecting 2 of the calls during the special session, the vaccine call and the AI Bill of Rights call, they went along and they basically rubber stamped this map because they're like, well, it's the governor's to defend. But, realistically, if you look at it, the U.S. Supreme Court's 6-3 Republican majority. We saw how they ruled, in terms of the case this week with the Louisiana case. And DeSantis feels confident there. Anything at a state level, he picked everybody in the Supreme Court, including the last person who basically was an appellate judge who backed his reading of the previous map. So, he feels comfortable with these aggressive maps. DeSantis is trying to make his mark as he leaves office and figures out what comes next. And, we're going to see some of this also play out. I think Mississippi or Louisiana is going to do something similar. Georgia is not. But, the idea is to shore up the Republican majority in Congress, because it's otherwise going to be a wave election year for Democrats, where they actually could have taken the House if the maps weren't tweaked. Now with redistricting all over the country, it's a different schematic.
We know that political power for Democrats is already very marginalized in the Florida legislature, and that's something that came up. This session where the map was approved was less than 90 minutes. No Republicans debated it. The House vote was ultimately 83-28. But we did hear from Jacksonville Democratic Representative Angie Nixon, who's, we should note, is also a candidate for U.S. Senate, but she disrupted the proceedings, shouting that the map was out of order. Let's just take a listen to that. So that's her with a bullhorn on the House, the floor of the House. John Daigle, she's known for making some opportunities of political issues, but she's also a voice that a lot of people that are her constituents believe has value, if for no other reason, because of the limited role that legislators of the Democratic Party have.
Yeah, and obviously, probably a smart stunt for Angie to do this while she's running for office and facing an opponent who's much better funded than she is. So she gets a lot of publicity out of this stunt. I don't know that it changed much in terms of the grand scheme, but got her some headlines and some additional media attention, which will be helpful. But, I come back to what AG was talking about. And the irony that I get stuck on is the governor's argument is that because of what the ruling at the U.S. Supreme Court in Louisiana versus Calais, that racial gerrymandering is wrong. That the logic is that will invalidate the Florida Fair District's provisions, which calls that political gerrymandering is wrong. So it seems like, if nothing else, the Louisiana versus Calais should reinforce the fact that in Florida, gerrymandering of any kind, racial or political, is wrong. But it seems like they're making the opposite argument. And either way, I still come back to the fact that regardless of whether you can accomplish this or not, and whether it'll stand legally, everybody knows that in Florida, 64% of voters in 2010, in an election where we elected Rick Scott, 64% of those voters said we don't want political gerrymandering in the state of Florida. And yet the Republicans voted because they can do it, they will. At some point, the elected officials have got to take into consideration what the voters want.
I think you've got to look at it, though, in terms of the argument for the map that actually was made, because that's going to carry some weight with the courts that consider the impending suits. In terms of counties that were split, cities that were split, lines that were crossed, it was comparable to the 2022 map that was upheld. Yes, it does wipe out a lot of Democratic-controlled districts. It takes it from 8 to 4. But the argument that they made is in the data, and the data is comparable to the map. Subjective feelings about either side. So, that's going to be the case that the state makes in defending the product.
Brenda Priestly Jackson, in terms of representation for Democrats, you may have some thoughts about Angie Nixon's performance there. You ran against Angie Nixon for that seat. And so whether that has value beyond political theater, I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on that. But also just in terms of, representation, when we have, it's been studied, this idea of minority representation, whether that has in some ways possibly disadvantaged Democrats, because it is in its own way a form of packing Democrats together, if you are creating minority access districts, that may in and of itself make other adjacent Republican districts more viable.
Well, I don't think that's our history. It had not been our history until the local redistricting in Jacksonville. It was not. It was not our history. We had a pretty fair representation of Democrats. You had a fair representation of minorities on the city council. You had at times a fair representation of women, and I think that that's something that's gotten lost. Female representation as well.
Sure.
I think that we have historically stripped the very basis of the Voting Rights Act, the very basis of what initial reconstruction. I say we're now in the second deconstruction. So I was not surprised at the state map. I was not surprised by the Supreme Court's ruling. Do I think it's grounded historically in the very 14th or 15th Amendment? Absolutely not. I think it is where we are right now, and we're governed by that. I am not one for political theater. I believe that when you're elected to serve folks, you serve them by improving the quality of their life with legislation and budget funding. That's what I did on school board. That's what I did on city council. And I think what we have right now, this partisan divide, and much like Don said, he's an independent. I'm an NPA now. I have no party affiliation. I actually changed my party affiliation about 1.5 years ago because I think through all of this, we're losing neighbors. This is the South first geographically, and the South has a rich history of disenfranchisement. It's now being repackaged, but I would contend that the repackaging didn't necessarily start on the right with the Republicans. I think locally the repackaging started on the left, because I think that the litigation brought to redistrict was not well thought out. It was not grounded in historical basis of why we had those districts. And now, if you look at the language in the local redistricting case, and then you look at the language in the Supreme Court case, you will see parallels.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Jacksonville Free Press editor Sylvia Perry, former Jacksonville City Council member Brenda Priestly Jackson, political consultant John Daigle, and state government reporter at Florida Politics, A.G. Gankarski. You can join our conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937. You can also go to firstcoastconnect.org to find all the ways that you can connect with us. And if you're listening on the radio and have noticed some glitches and some hiccups, that's our signal, our transmitter is having some issues. It's being addressed. But if you want to hear a clean signal, you can go to the WJCT app. You can also watch us on YouTube or Facebook if you want to hear it glitch free. Sylvia, I want to ask you just about, the mood for voters. This change that we've seen in Florida is expected to kind of withstand what was being predicted as a blue wave, that this could shift enough votes to congressional candidates that are Republican that it could withstand. I believe I saw an analysis in Axios of like a 10-point swing. If people were that motivated against either the current administration or just by a midterm turnover, that this change could withstand a 10-point swing in that direction. And so therefore reinforcing Republicans and their chances in this election.
I'm really not sure about that, because we are all feeling the effects of a trickle-down theory from the national leadership. I mean, whether that be the gas prices, whether that be the Alcatraz Alley here in Florida, whether that be the debate over the loss for or against the AI dollars in our different communities. And people are wanting to see a change. Those that have systematically supported the red here have noticed, and they're definitely taking a side.
I'm going to take a call from Ed in Clay County. Good morning, Ed. Go ahead.
Good morning. It's interesting on the question of minorities being able to get elected in non-minority majority areas. It seems to be that the Republicans seems to be doing that all over the state. It's the Democrats that seem to have a problem. Here in Clay County, we have a female Republican sheriff. Prior to her, we had a black Republican sheriff, and here's only 13% black. In Clay County, in Duval County, we have a black sheriff who's also a Republican. And they're not a majority of the African Americans in that county. South Florida, we have in Naples a Congressman Byron Donalds, who is now running for governor, as we all know, elected in a single-digit African American district. The Republican seems to be, of course, we have another example, Senator Rubio, who was elected for the entire state in he's Hispanic. What is the issue? It seems to be that minorities do not survive the primary system in non-minority majority area, except for Republican areas.
That's a very good note, Ed. I want to ask you about that, John Daigle, because there's a difference between electing candidates with that may be a minority versus necessarily electing a candidate of a constituency's choice. And I think it's important to kind of distinguish between those two.
No, I mean, there was certainly a time in Florida where, one party or the other benefited from the racial demographics of districts. And I think that has, as the caller pointed out, that has faded a lot. I mean, you look at what the Hispanic community did in 2024 in going largely for Trump in that race. As the caller pointed out, the leading candidate right now on the Republican side for governor is African American. I don't think the racial issues are as strong right now as a determinant as just whose team you play on. It's about red and blue, not black and white.
Your thoughts, Brenda Priestly Jackson?
Well, I agree. And that's why in an ideal scenario, you really want it to have equal representation and a bipartisan spirit to get things done. In this red or blue camp that we're existing now, by and large, if your ideology does not align with a particular camp, then you may not get your needs addressed. I think that's a problem. That is a major problem that we're dealing with. And I think Jacksonville is an interesting place. It's an interesting place because we've had two in more recent times Black city council presidents who were Republicans. So I think people have to step back and say ideologically, what are the values being espoused by one group over another, and where can you meet in the middle to get things done? And I think we don't have that going on right now. I think that first off, no electorate is a monolith, right? So no demographic is a monolith. No one looks at all the issues the same way. And unfortunately, in the state of Florida right now, this was telegraphed what was going to happen. There was going to be a marginalization of the Democratic voice. And that's why I think, again, you have to be very conscious when you take any action if you don't have a historical foundation of why you are where you are right now. History does not begin when you arrive someplace. And I think a lot of elected officials and others think, I am the history. You're not. You're just an actor in the play at this moment. There are chapters before you. Please read them and know.
Yeah. AG, when it comes to political alliances, there was a time when our Congress people would go and proudly say they're bringing home the bacon. It wasn't a partisan allocation. Famously, people like Corrine Brown would bring money back for military and, all kinds of issues, infrastructure, stuff that wasn't partisan in nature. But more and more we see, certainly at the national level, states that are governed by Democrats being penalized for that, funding being taken away from certain projects because the leadership there doesn't align with this administration. And it seems like we're seeing more of that even on a state level.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you go back even before Corrine Brown, Charlie Bennett, he was there for half a century, and he was very good at earmarks and bringing home appropriations. That punitive sort of punishment of Democrats, especially Democrats who criticize the governor's office, that's a big issue in this state. Look at Angie Nixon. She's yet to bring home any appropriations in 6 years. Tracy Davis has brought home some. She's going to lead the Senate Democrats next year. And it makes it tough because there are Democrats who do play ball, like Darrell Roussan, the state senator, down in Southwest Florida. But it's a structural issue, and part of it is because of the way the districts are drawn. You have a lot of R+10 districts that are drawn, including this new congressional map. You have D+30 districts. You have districts in the city, District 10, for example, which is almost exclusively Democratic. And so when you look at that, it basically, not on the city level, but on the state and national level, it privileges the most extreme voices in the party. You're really on both sides. So you get your squad types, you get your Rashida Tlaib, you get your, those type of people. And, they're very easy to put into a soundbite, to twist around and say, you take 3 words and you make that emblematic of everything they're saying, you ignore the rest of the critique, and you paint them out as public enemy number 1, you set up the Orwellian 2-minute hate, and you can say, well, we're justified in not giving money to this or that or the other. Somebody like Mamdani in New York City, he's played an interesting game because he talks very radically in some ways, but he also manages to build a relationship with Trump. He's been to the White House many times. They have a good rapport, even if they do criticize each other. And, maybe that's the way forward. But a lot of these Democrats, you have to go so left to win your primary. And you start, drinking your own bathwater, so to speak. That's very hard to play the game that, Charlie Bennett and Corrine Brown played way back when.
Sure, so much and in the primaries determined now.
And I just want to amplify what AG said, and that's the real issue. So Corrine's thing was Corrine delivers. She delivered for everybody. And you understand the political dynamics when you run from elected office, right? And so you also have to understand that you have an obligation to deliver for your neighbors. That's the election, not to deliver, to improve their quality of life. Now, if ranting and raving improves the quality of life, in my almost 60 years, I haven't seen it. Okay, and improving the quality of life. How do you address the infrastructure issues? How do you address small businesses? How do you do those kind of things? And I think that is what's going to be missing in this entire debate.
We've got a call from Omar on the west side. Good morning, Omar. Go ahead.
Good morning to you all, and blessings. And speaking of historical context, the Confederates have never gone away. They have never gone with the wind. The Electoral College has prevented, most of the stuff that progressives have wanted. The Democrats are just, oblivious to this. And the 2025 plan that they have enacted was enacted because a black man got in the White House. So they are eliminating every chance of that happening again. And I don't see any coming back from this. I just don't. But we have always had backlash, so we will see. We're living through history right now.
That's a fact. Omar, thanks for your comments. We got an email from Marty saying this country has a long history with race and voting. So when we start raising the bar on what counts as discrimination, while also narrowing how we report it, it's fair to ask whether we're addressing the problem or just making it easier to deny.
Yeah, but I come back to what AG and Brenda both mentioned. It's been something I've championed for a long time. One of the things that people hate most about politics right now, and we have one of the lowest public approval ratings of politicians, is the divisiveness, is the inability to compromise. It's the fact that we don't have Charlie Bennett's and Tilly Fowler's anymore. And this process, this redistricting process, just feeds into that gerrymandering that only allows the most extreme candidates to survive primaries. Moderates cannot survive primaries, and that's why our elected officials keep getting more and more divisive and less able to accomplish anything in any kind of a compromised fashion. And I think what happens with the redistricting process that President Trump set off earlier this year with Texas is going to do nothing but make politics more divisive and less able to compromise and agree on anything.
Is there any movement behind the idea of what's sometimes called a jungle primary, or a primary that is more open to, a ranked voting?
Those are great systems and they work real well. The only problem is neither party's ever going to agree to that because, the primary system as it exists today is what gives the parties their power, and the parties work for big money in politics. So
explain that a little bit, though. Some people in the Republican Party, some people in the Democratic Party also object to the fact that this is feeding the most extreme voices in their party. Are there not centrists in those parties, Brenda Priestly Jackson, that would say, explain what the power is that they're trying to hold on to there?
Well, it's the power. It's actually the power, and the power is now separated from neighbors, the electorate, right? And I unfortunately, I lived firsthand. There is not a space for a moderate, even a left-leaning moderate. It's not. I think one of the most disheartening things I've experienced in my last bid for elected office was I was deemed a Republican plant because I've worked in a bipartisan fashion in every elected office I was in. That's because I built relationships with those who I served with to be able to serve my neighbors. So the more we nationalize this red and blue battle, the more we lose the local nature of politics, which is really what it's all about.
We've got a call from Linda in Mandarin. Go ahead, Linda.
Yes, good morning. I think that, we already had a supermajority in Florida. And they already had a chokehold on the state. So the reason for this current redistricting might be that it's been reported that Governor DeSantis is lobbying Trump for a position in the cabinet, and he wants to jump to the head of the line of states that can get this done since there's such a battle across the nation. But, for all of the pundits and the NPAs on the panel, what people want is not being addressed. If my Republican representative, which I have one, doesn't return my call, isn't doing anything except voting in lockstep with the House Speaker, when the House Speaker allows them to be in session and vote, then I don't have representation. I don't have a way for my concerns to be addressed locally. Now, he's on a platform, Mr. Republican, cool. If you can do that and serve me as well, that's fine. But normally, power seeds nothing. And when you become a politician, you sometimes forget what it was when you were just a constituent looking to have somebody to be your voice and that would return a call or an email or tell me, instead of the little email blurbs of what you've done that has nothing to do with my life.
Yeah, Linda, thanks.
Yeah, it was interesting. She mentioned that the question about whether DeSantis is headed towards a position in the Trump administration. And I was watching, there was a question out on Polymarket. It's been out there for a couple months. Will DeSantis be in the Trump administration by June 1? And it had been riding at about 15% for a long time. And then the morning where Perez came out at his press conference and said he was not going to take up the AI amendment or the vaccine amendment, it shot up to about 51%. And people thought that that he was not going to get the redistricting, and then it rode at about 51% until they got the redistricting done, and then it went back down to about 20%. So there's obviously a large group of people out there who believe that that this is being done, to appease the president and his requests and his worries about the midterms.
I don't know if Susie Wiles believes that, though. And, the idea of Susie Wiles and Ron DeSantis in a cabinet meeting together after DeSantis tried to destroy her, that's one mitigating factor against him becoming part of this administration. Also, Chris LaCivita, has said similar things. There is a lot of internal resistance to Ron DeSantis in the White House, no matter how many nice things Trump may say about him publicly.
No, voters seem to have a tendency to embrace the politicians that embrace their ideology. And those that such thing as criminal reform, such as voting access, such as economic equity, that doesn't become effective until it becomes part of your backyard. And now all of a sudden you care about it. But until then, those in power, those that don't care about it, are going to reinforce that ID, such as the Voting Rights Act, not the Voting Rights Act, but the voting rights restrictions that have been newly placed in Florida, such as the lock them up rather than rehabilitation. All of that, it plays a part of who you are voting for and supporting.
Well, I want to move on. I will note we are going to have Republican Party Chair Evan Power on the program on Monday. We'll be talking more about this with Rick Mullaney, a political analyst. So
he's also running for Congress, Evan Power.
Evan Power, yes. Running for Congress.
Yeah, District 2.
Okay.
I'm out toward Tallahassee. It's an open seat. Neil Dunn is retiring.
Who is retiring there?
Neil Dunn, I believe.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on now to an expanding investigation into the city's water and electric utility. Florida Attorney General James Uthmeier began his own JEA investigation with a subpoena on April 17th. This is now targeting communications about the dismissal or the lack of contract renewal with Ballard Partners, JEA's lobbying contract. I want to start with you, Brenda Priestly Jackson, because obviously on City Council, your time there, you investigated JEA. There are some, that are saying, well, it's City Council shouldn't be investigating. There's too many investigations happening. How is this different from the investigation that you all did of JEA, what we're seeing now?
Well, our investigation centered on the wrongful attempt to sell our municipal utility and what were the underlying factors of that. So let's look at our charter, what was created in our charter to allow that to happen, who were the actors and agents in that, and then it resulted in not only criminal charges, but a criminal conviction, right, for the attempt to wrongfully sell our municipal utility. That's where we started. What we have right now, I believe, is a special investigatory committee, and I would say I do think our council time, open the door. You can have a special investigatory committee for anything these days. That's the kind of the going thing. This is different because it seems to be about a lot of personality. And the scary part for me is when you start this, and if you give any impression that our independent municipal utility is not in being independently run, I know those who want to still privatize it are chomping at the bit. And so the ballot partners, you have lobbying firms who establish relationships with others. That's just a given. I said to my son when I was coming in, I said, we've heard of what Trump derangement syndrome. Sometimes I think locally they have Lenny derangement syndrome. I seriously, I mean, it's anything.
You're talking about Lenny Curry.
Lenny Curry, anything that he's a part of. I had a positive working relationship with him when I was on city council. I'm just going to be very candid. We did. I had a positive working relationship with him. I think that there are allegations internally now of cultural issues. There are some allegations of racist and discriminatory practices. There are some allegations now of unfair influence with putting those on the board. All that adds into the stew and the mix that does not help us maintain the independence of that. I am concerned, and with when I hear individuals talk about we evaluate people based on merit, and you have reduced the numbers of diversity in your workforce, that gives the implication that those who were in the workforce that were members of minority groups didn't have the merit to be in the position. So you got to be real careful about language that you use.
You're talking about one of their general counsel representatives at JEA who was dismissed by
right, and then also the other complaints and issues that have come to council member Jacoby Pittman relative to the culture that's there. And then what I've heard the response from the executives at JEA is that we now select people based on merit. So am I to presume that before that you did not, or was there no merit contemplation because of the hue and pigment of someone's skin? And so I think that, mind you, I think, and I have respect for our council president. I served with him. Folly to send an email, I got to do a favor for somebody. Just pure folly, just pure folly and unnecessary.
Which is what kicked off this series of investigations.
It's unnecessary. It's unnecessary. But I think that then undercurrent, what's the agenda that's behind everything else? And I don't personally feel that the desire to privatize our municipal utility is ever far removed from the table. I believe that for the rest of my life, we're going to see that come back up. And when you have things like that, it gives the impression that perhaps it's not being properly managed and run. It has a dysfunctional board. There's so many other issues that are raised right now.
So there's legitimate issues, AG, that people are raising, or at least legitimate concerns that they're raising. And yet, when you have the attorney general stepping in, it does sort of take on a political cast. This is an attorney general that has kind of, challenged a little bit our local state attorney on the gun registry issue, sort of said her investigation was inadequate. We're going to get something done. Now he's inserting his agency, his statewide prosecution agency, into JEA, which she's also investigating.
Yeah, he has focused very heavily on big cities in the state. And James Uthmeyer is the most aggressive attorney general I've ever seen. Never let a crisis go to waste kind of guy. And it's just yet another of a scaffold of investigations. I did want to address the structural issues of JEA. There are parallels really between Aaron Zahn and Vicky Cavey. Both of them were basically internal hires, handpicked. There wasn't really a vetting process. JEA never brings in an external CEO who can actually clean up the culture. So it's the same culture there decade after decade with the appointed board. And, so there are things to look at in that. I remember I was covering the Aaron Zahn hiring process very closely. I was in that boardroom. There were more qualified candidates that the board basically shot down. There was one guy he came from San Antonio in a tropical storm, and they were mocking him basically for not being willing to drive through the rain or something.
Right. I recall that.
And they elevated Aaron Zahn. It was a monumentally unqualified board in that case. A lot of political appointments that basically were, people that were in Lenny Curry's corner during his reelection, but this time we're seeing something very similar. This board is not accountable. Ron Salem has said that. Rory Diamond has said that in the city council. Ron Salem is the liaison to JEA board. He's not allowed to speak in meetings. So you basically have this unaccountable appointed board that installs a CEO who's making top dollar And, the idea for making top dollars is she has the institutional knowledge that she knows how things work, that she's going to avoid scandals like this.
Yeah.
This is a real issue, and there's a lot of unaccountability. If you read my column about a month ago where I called for direct elections of the JEA and JTA board, I stand by that.
Well, I want to drill down on that a little bit because it has been kind of needling me lately. There was, and John, you'll well remember this, but this whole idea that we were going to create these independent authorities so that they could function independently without a political cast. They were going to be run like a business. And now there's this sense that the city has to kind of govern all of this stuff, and it's happening not just at JEA but JAA and all of the authorities. There's this sort of sense that they need to be more fealty to the city hall, more fealty to the council.
And as AG's pointed out in that column, which was a great column, it is, the problem is they are supposed to be independent, and they are becoming more and more being used as political tools. And it comes back to what you started the question with, this really fascinating dynamic between our local state attorney and our state attorney general. That, to me, as a political junkie, I find it fascinating, going back to the time over that gun registry where the state attorney handled it, and it seemed the AG did not feel like the Democratic mayor of Jacksonville paid enough of a political price for that and came in and stepped in. And it seems to be the same model here, where the AG does not think that the Deegan administration is paying enough of a political price on this JEA thing. So they're stepping in to make sure that it does benefit the Republican Party. And it's just, you see that happening at the federal level with DOJ, and you're seeing now it happen at the state level with the AG, where those offices are being increasingly used for political purposes. And as you point out, we're seeing a lot of people would like to be able to use the JEA and the JTA for political purposes.
We're going to see when Wyman Duggan runs for mayor later this year, a lot of this stuff will be in political ads. So whatever comes of Othmeier's investigations, probably not much. It's going to look really good in mailers. It's going to look really good in ads.
And that's the purpose.
Scandal-ridden City Hall.
Yeah.
And that's how it's going to play out.
Yeah, I want to say, I think that it's really important when you talk about the independent authorities who, under our theory of consolidation, were supposed to be independent and separate, right? They were supposed to have, and depending on the nature, the configuration of the entity, that determines their level of independence. But I do believe that if you have PR statements or press releases that come out that relate to the independent authorities, it undercuts their independence.
Absolutely.
And if you advance a position with a strong arm mayor to say something, it has a level of influence. I don't know that that's originally how that was intended to be, right? And so we see it locally, it does not necessarily make it correct, and we see it on the state level that does not make it correct.
I do want to just move on and talk about a news item this week, a memorial that was damaged. This was the Dollar General mass shooting, a racist mass shooting that happened in August of 2023. 3 people murdered in that. Sylvia, this week, the Times-Union reported that this incident happened on the 27th, but this memorial has been important to the community. It's been important to the residents of Jacksonville to remember what happened on that day, and it has been just kind of torn apart.
Yes, it's a shame to think that this is something that was not made out of anybody's tax dollars. The community came together to place these memorials there in remembrance of the Dollar General slayings. It comes a week after the $3 million was allocated by the state to help reinforce the community, and is further echoed by another memorial that had disappeared out of St. Johns County of a lynching victim. So we like to think that we live in a raceless society, but yet these type of incidents continue to happen and reinforce a divide.
Yeah. Brenda Priestly Jackson, in an interview subsequent to that memorial being destroyed, Rockman Johnson, city council member, said that there is some momentum to try to create a more permanent and designated city parks run, perhaps, memorial to those victims that might be more able to be reinforced or protected, or something more durable.
Yeah, I read that as well. That's the only information I have on that. I think that's a positive. I think memorials serve a purpose. I think that the community put that up I wasn't surprised to see it's destroyed. I think that we're just not in a kind period of time. I think people are unkind. I don't think we are very compassionate. I think it starts from the top all the way down, and you saw that there. I would strongly support and encourage Councilman Johnson to put something up that's permanent, that gives the historical context. You definitely want to do it in the AI era of what happened and when, and so that young people can and others can understand what a tragedy occurred in Jacksonville in August of 23.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Sylvia Perry, Brenda Priestly Jackson, John Daigle, A.G. Gankarski, thank you all so much for being here this morning. I really appreciate your insights.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. We're going to be back in just a minute with our own David Luckin to talk about his newest sonic creation this week in music history.
Wolfson Children's Hospital, where generations of families have found hope. Because it's here at Wolfson Children's where answers are found, odds are beaten, and comebacks begin every day. Wolfson Children's, always here. Visit wolfsonchildrens.com. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Accidents can happen when you least expect it. For decades, our attorneys have dug out the facts to help juries decide who's at fault.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
Film at WJCT presents the award-winning independent drama The Paper Bag Plan. When a devoted father receives a life-altering diagnosis, he is forced to prepare his son who has a disability for an independent future. His simple yet powerful plan, teaching him the skills to land his first job bagging groceries. Inspired by real-life experiences, it has touched audiences and earned numerous festival awards. May 6th at WJCT Studios. Doors open at 6:30 p.m. Film starts at 7 p.m. Tickets at wjct.org/film.
What does public media mean to you? Local news, unforgettable stories, children's programs, or music that moves you? On Public Media Giving Days, May 1st and 2nd, support what matters most. Give today at wjct.org/give. Thank you.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth sees an enemy within as Democrats confront him on Iran.
The biggest adversary we face are the reckless and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans.
This week on the Friday News Roundup, the American public gets a price tag for the war, but no exit plan. Also, the Supreme Court guts the Voting Rights Act even further. What that means for the midterms and beyond. All next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10.
Welcome back. Well, you've probably heard one of WJCT's more popular daily segments today in music history. The segment is so popular, in fact, it's going to become a regular staple of our weekend lineup. Here to tell us about it is our own David Luckin, WJCT Public Media Station Manager, Director of Programming, and host of our longest-running music program, Electro Lounge. David, good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you. So, first of all, what were we listening to right there?
That was the sounder, the ABC, at the top of every hour when we were kids. If you heard that, you stop doing what you're doing and hear the news.
Here it comes.
Right off the top. And it was funny, and back in the 60s, some stations then started doing their news at 5 minutes before the hour to beat the other guys. And really what it's all about is changing the channel. As soon as you hear the news, you go back to music, so...
Yeah,
it's just a little bit of history. Anytime I have an excuse to mix up news and music, I do it.
Yeah, people love this daily dose of history. It's become so popular, but it's a short spot. And this new program really gives you an opportunity to expand on that concept. So, I mean, I know you love editing. You create these amazing sonic landscapes just for fun sometimes.
Absolutely.
Tell us what is inspiring you. How do you create a segment for this program?
I do a lot of research, and I go to the news of that day and then match it with, I look at the news of the day and I look at the music of the day, and then I just pick the good stuff so I can play music. It's really, just an excuse to play music on a news station.
Yeah, but...
But I love the news. People know me. I'm split 50-50. I'm news and music. So in any job I've ever had, I've tried to add music to the news and news to the music so that there's context. So we take you from Cotton Club in Harlem to Woodstock, Man on the Moon to the Civil War. There's something different every day.
But speak about how that, well, let's take a listen. And I want to ask you just a little bit about the weave of history and music.
My fellow Americans, I am about to sign into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I want to take this occasion to talk to you about what that law means to every American. 188 years ago this week, a small band of valiant men began a long struggle for freedom. They pledged their lives, their fortunes.
People get ready, there's a train a-coming. You don't need no baggage, you just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the dealers humming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord.
A beautiful weave there. Yep. Really nice. So you are giving us the music, incredible music, but you're trying to give us a sense of, the area, the time, the place that this came from, the culture that surrounded it. And it's something that we don't always get a chance to think about. We often listen to music just in isolation.
No, and that's what the fun part is. I'm a stickler for facts. So if you just heard People Get Ready, that's from 1964, right when Johnson made that announcement. There's always music to complement historic events. And like I said, I just love history. I love reading all of it. And it's a question of whittling it down sometimes. There's so much we could put it in an hour. To that mix, though, some of it is, because you're in this business, some of it is just dumb luck. I knew I wanted that song, and I knew I had Johnson, and I laid it under, and his cadence was exactly like the music. So sometimes you just sit back and smile, and I can't say I'm brilliant. I'm just say, boy, sometimes we just get lucky.
The magic happens.
Yeah.
So this program, as we said, is kind of a spinoff of this. You're doing this daily thing, and you get a lot of response from people.
I did, and actually where it came from, we showed a film a few weeks ago, and someone came up to me and said, God, I really like that This Week in History you did a few years ago. And I started thinking, we did it in 2023. So I thought, let's bring it back as a summer special from May until the end of September, because history doesn't change. Lucky for me, it's evergreen. So, and you're right, I get more response from my little 30 seconds every morning than I do for the Electro Lounge. People say, I love that. And I wish the music was longer. So this gives us a chance to take the history and enlighten people and match it with the music of the day, because you can't separate them.
Yeah, and so is this going to run chronologically? We said that it kicks off this Sunday.
Right, and it'll run through September 30th. It's the week. I mean, I can't do every day, but This Week in History, whatever happened this week, you'll hear Sunday night, and it's fun. It's good fun.
You mean This Week in History so many years ago?
Right.
And you're just choosing those years?
I am.
By... I guess, are those going chronologically, or are they just kind of up and down, depending on...
No, it is all chronological.
Okay.
Yeah, This Week in History will be what happened this week, whether it was 1938 or 1968. Next week will be whatever happened that week. So luckily, I've got the whole world to pick from. I mean, I can take you from Broadway. Like I said, the Cotton Club, opened this week in 1938, and the next week it was Woodstock happened. So it's a real mixed up kind of show. And if you like music and history, you'll love it. And I also try and pick versions that you may not have heard before.
Yeah.
Like I know I'm playing Truckin' by the Dead in a few weeks, and I picked a nice live version. So for everyone who loves the Dead
bootleg,
live,
yep,
you're going to get to hear a 6-minute version of Truckin'. So it's just good fun. And like I say, it's an excuse to escape the news, even though I'm using the news, and kind of get to different times and different places in history.
Well, we love that you are sharing with us some of the contents of your nerd brain on history and music, because you know everything about both. So
I appreciate you having me on, and I hope everyone will tune in.
7 o'clock.
6 Central.
6 Central, Sunday night. All right, David Luckin, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to everybody who called and listened. Please join us Monday. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking to State Republican Party Chair Evan Power about how the GOP is reacting to a radically different political landscape. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Alchemy Yoga and Wellness, opening this summer in Ortega, offers a balanced approach to movement and recovery. Services include yoga, infrared sauna, cold plunge, massage, and facials in one location. More information at alchemyjacks.yoga.